It's Bhante Rakita. So I'm going to be doing a video which is basically on healthy and unhealthy responses, unhealthy criticism, toxic responses, healthier criticism, and healthy responses, healthier responses. Just options and examples. Just kicking the discussion around and then seeing what we come up with. All right, so let's have a look. I'm going to start off. Here are some sort of notes I was making as I was running through. As noticed, I often run into just doing puns, playing wordplay with people's phrases, and I just made a notice there. It's called Spoonerisms, when you playfully swap syllables, and it can be just a way of deflecting. By suddenly changing the subject, avoiding sort of serious discussion and conflict, but it also railroads sort of sincere discussion. And I just made a note of it for myself to sort of be mindful and try to weed it out. I found myself doing it in a chat thread with a friend's Facebook thread, and somebody else did it as well, following on from me. And then I went to look it up about quotes on puns and doing this wordplay, and somebody said it's like a child or a teenager who likes putting coins on a railroad track, enjoying seeing the whole train sort of get derailed. And it's similar that, you know, there can be quite serious discussion with some content, and just this one insertion of a pun and the whole thing can get sent off, flying off topic. So let's have a look at another thing, which is... I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said. I've got my AI chipping in. I've got this, which was about gaslighting, just to make sure we get a sort of definition of that. Also stereotyping and the dismissive reductive tendency. So, for example, a way of speaking that someone might say is, I feel really hurt by what you said yesterday. And a gaslighting response might be like this: I never said that. You're just imagining things again. So it denies your memory and making you doubt your own perception by denial of reality or events. Then, I feel really hurt by what you said yesterday. You're overreacting. You're so sensitive. It's not a big deal. This is minimizing feelings. Minimizing feelings, this dismisses the other person's emotions, making them feel irrational or unsupported. So gaslighting via shifting blame. If you weren't so sensitive, we wouldn't be having this problem. So this redirects responsibility for the situation onto the victim as well. All right, so a little phenomena there of unhealthy and toxic communication. Another one here that came up was venting. I wanted sometimes when I was given these answers to go in to look at it and make sure I understood what this phenomena was. One was gaslighting, another was venting. I've heard of both, but I wanted to get a definition. So venting, expressing frustration about work. I can't believe how incompetent my boss is. They expect me to do everything without any support. So this could be in response to another thing completely. Somebody wants to discuss this, but the person offloads a load of emotion that's nothing to do with what's under discussion. They're just simply venting. I noticed this where I passed someone on to a friend of mine who does counselling. And what he said was that after a little while, he just said, I don't think I can really help you. It seems that all you want to do is vent. And if you're just going to vent and then, you know, and not really listen to the suggestions that I give you or do the exercises that I propose, then there's not really much benefit in doing it. And they were like, oh, but I thought, you know, they thought that going to a counsellor was about offloading frustration and going out. So venting. So, for example, that was the one that we just heard. This is releasing pent-up frustration without necessarily seeking solutions. So going to a counsellor is supposed to be developing tools and finding out what's missing, rather than just this sort of gratuitous offloading. So talking about personal struggles, instead of engaging and listening with the other person, I'm so stressed out with all the things I have to do. I feel like I'm drowning. So venting emotions to feel heard and lighten the emotional burden. Another one, complaining about an unfair situation. It's ridiculous how they treat me differently from everyone else. I don't even know why I bother sometimes. Sharing...
Right, you've outlined those definitions really clearly. Gaslighting and venting definitely highlight different unhealthy communication tendencies. One about manipulation and denial, the other about emotional dumping. The counselor's feedback is also interesting. It really frames the importance of active participation and solutions in counseling, rather than just venting without engagement. Do you want to tie these examples into broader themes, or just keep building up the definitions for now?
Yeah, these are just a few notes, basically, that I made, and I just wanted to share about them without particular context at the moment. So another one is just complaining about unfair situations, like venting, like talking about personal struggles. It's kind of toxic because it's not in the discussion. It's just, going on about your thing. It's ridiculous how they treat me differently from everyone else. I don't even know why I bother sometimes. So sharing dissatisfaction about perceived injustice or inequity. It's just that it's off topic in this case. That's why it was described in there. So let's look at I've got this 4-grid system of, in the lower left quadrant, the unhealthy critique, and with it, a toxic response to that. And then above the top left one, the healthier critique, and in the top right-hand one, healthier response. So in this one, we have, again, following on from some of the previous ones, this involves feminism versus sometimes monasticism, but in this case, it's just feminism versus male culture. So it's looking at an unhealthy critique followed by a toxic response. So the unhealthy critique: men in the West still dominate every aspect of life, oppressing women and refusing to share power equally. So there's an unhealthy critique. And then the toxic response: women in the West already have more than equality. Now they want to rule. Go to the Middle East and look at women with real problems. So back to the unhealthy critique. So why is that called an unhealthy critique? Surely there is a problem, isn't there? So it sounds like this: men in the West still dominate every aspect of life, oppressing women and refusing to share power equally. So firstly, it's overgeneralization. Secondly, it's blame shifting. Thirdly, it uses polarizing language. So what do I mean? Overgeneralization: it paints all men with the same brush. Blame shifting: it attributes systemic issues to individual behavior. And it uses polarizing language. It's creating an us versus them mentality.
That critique does indeed overgeneralize, making it unbalanced and unhelpful as a starting point for constructive dialogue. The blame-shifting aspect puts responsibility entirely on men in the West, ignoring complexities or shared societal dynamics. And polarizing language like dominate and refusing to share creates an us versus them narrative, which escalates tension rather than fostering understanding.
Right.
It's a strong critique, but its tone and framing make it unhealthy. Would you like to explore the healthier critique and response that fit this scenario?
Let's have a look at the toxic response that came back. Or there's two, I think I can see. It's unusual how it's been laid out. All right, so it comes as also toxic butting in, disrupting the flow, and hijacking the conversation all in one time. So this person might nearly have hasn't really finished what they were saying, and in comes this person, interjects with, women in the West already have more than equality. Now they want to rule. Go to the Middle East and look at women with real problems. So the toxic response is toxic because, A, it disrupts the flow. They may have had more to explain about what they were saying. There's comparative suffering, and there is generalization again. So what does this mean? That disrupts the flow, it interrupts the conversation, and therefore dismisses others' contributions. The comparative suffering, it minimizes one group's issues, comparing them to another's struggles. So there can be real issues in the West, even in the boardroom, in the glass ceiling, in staff rooms, in all kinds of ways, in the police forces or something. And yet, just by comparing it to people with torture and extreme situations, it makes it appear as if actually there's no problem over here at all. So it's using comparative suffering in a biased kind of way. And then there's generalization. It assumes all women in the West share the same experience. And then there are three more reasons why it's toxic. It dismisses concerns, shows comparative suffering, which we just said, and generalization. It seems like there's been a duplication there. So the dismisses concerns part, it invalidates the initial attempt to broaden the discussion. And if after the healthy initial critique, this is said, let's explore varying gender challenges globally, we hear. Toxic response, women in the West already have more than equality. Now they want to rule, go to the Middle East and look at real problems. In these scenarios, the healthy response aims to steer the conversation towards a more balanced and empathetic dialogue, while the toxic response tends to shut down the conversation or escalate conflict. So let's have a look at a healthier critique. So could have, instead of saying what it said, men in the West still dominate every aspect of life, oppressing women and refusing to share power equally. So instead of going off on that start, which shuts down, alienates, and reduces any possibility of a dialogue, let's explore varying gender challenges globally. That's a nice one. It has an inclusive approach. It acknowledges diversity and it uses constructive dialogue. So the inclusive approach, it encourages a broader perspective on gender issues. It acknowledges diversity. It recognizes different experiences across regions. And uses a constructive dialogue, opens the floor for meaningful conversation. So it's a much better strategy for starting. And a healthier response, instead of that butting in, disrupting the flow, hijacking the conversation with women in the West already have more than equality. Now they want to rule. So go to the Middle East. So healthier response would be different regions, different issues, all deserve attention. So this is very fair. Different regions, the West, Paris, London, Amsterdam, they have their issues, different issues, and the different issues in Sudan, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran and Iraq, so on, they all deserve attention. This is very fair, but it's not conflating the same problems in different areas. So this uses three things: empathy, equity-focused, and non-confrontational, as opposed to the last one, the toxic one. It acknowledges struggles in various contexts. It suggests that all issues are worth addressing, and it promotes understanding and respect. Empathy, acknowledging struggles.
I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
It's equity-focused. It suggests that all issues are worth addressing. And it's non-confrontational. It promotes understanding and respect. Good. All right. So let's move on to another example. So in this one, the unhealthy critique in the beginning, it has this tone and this statement built into it. All right, so male anti-feminist says this. So it's a male speaking here. They are an anti-feminist and they're speaking. And they say, you hate patriarchy. So matriarchal society is the solution, is it? So there it starts off. And then the toxic response, there's a feminist with a smirk says, oh, absolutely. I'm just waiting for my crown and throne to start ruling the world. Actually, we're looking for a comedian court jester if you're interested in applying. All right? So, two types of things going on here. So, the unhealthy critique from the male anti-feminist says, you hate patriarchy, so matriarchal society is the solution, is it? Why it's toxic, it uses a straw man argument, it has a derisive tone, and it uses polarizing language. So what's a straw man argument? A straw man argument is when someone distorts or oversimplifies another argument to make it easier to attack or refute. The term straw man comes from the idea of creating a simplistic, easily defeated version of an argument, much like a straw dummy or scarecrow, which can be knocked down without much effort. It doesn't represent the real complexity of the opponent's stance, which was to do with patriarchy. So there's a straw man argument which misrepresents the feminist position. Secondly, there's a derisive tone. It dismisses the critique without engagement. And thirdly, there's polarizing. It reinforces an us versus them mentality. So that for these three reasons, it is considered unhealthy. Straw man argument, which is an unfair misrepresentation and creates a sort of false sense of victory. Secondly, the tone. It's derisive and dismissive. And thirdly, the tone and the tactic of encouraging polarization, us versus them. All right, so then the toxic response from the feminist about, I'm just waiting for my crown. Like, I'm a matriarch and I've got a throne. We need a comedian and a jester in the court if you want to apply. So it's using a few things. It's using clever comebacks. It's using wit as the solution to counter argument. It's using comedic impersonation, and it's using mocking and caricature as well. So this response uses sarcasm and exaggeration to mock the man's statement, turning it into a joke rather than engaging with the argument seriously. That's using clever comebacks, witty remarks, comedic impersonation, and mocking or caricature. Why it's toxic? It mocks the speaker, it escalates conflict, and it lacks substance. So in mocking the speaker, it undermines dialogue through ridicule and escalates conflict. It provokes defensive reactions. And thirdly, it lacks substance. It avoids addressing the actual critique, which was that you hate patriarchy, so matriarchal society is the solution, is it? So really doesn't get into the actual topic, just turns the thing into comedy. All right, so let's look at healthier critiques from that and a healthier response from that. So
both the critique and the response here illustrate how unhealthy communication patterns can spiral into unproductive conflict. The critique's use of a straw man distorts the feminist position, which prevents meaningful engagement. On the other hand, the response uses mockery and wit to deflect rather than address the underlying critique. While it might feel satisfying in the moment, it escalates tension without progressing the conversation. A healthier critique could acknowledge nuances like, I feel there's a perception that patriarchy is inherently negative. Could we discuss what aspects are being criticized and why? And a healthier response might seek to clarify intent. Like, feminism isn't about replacing one power structure with another. It's about equity and fairness for all genders. These approaches foster dialogue without creating polarization or ridicule. Shall we explore more examples or unpack these healthier alternatives further?
Let's have a listen to what I've got here under the healthier critique and the healthier response. So in the healthier critique, instead of kicking off with this male anti-feminist going, you hate patriarchy, so matriarchy is the solution, is it? This kind of sarcastic thing. The male healthily says, How can we address gender imbalances in society without creating new forms of equality? Why is that healthy? Well, it's constructive, it's inclusive, and it's forward-thinking. I'll hear it again. How can we address gender imbalances in society without creating new forms of inequality? So it's constructive in that it seeks solutions rather than assigning blame. It's inclusive in that it invites input from various perspectives. It's forward-thinking because it aims to create a fairer society for everyone. And then this approach encourages a more balanced and inclusive conversation, focusing on solutions and collaboration. Why it's healthy: it has a constructive focus, frames the issue as a shared challenge. How can we address gender imbalances in society without creating new forms of inequality? It invites collaboration, promotes dialogue instead of conflict. It balances complexity. It avoids oversimplifying sensitive topics. By breaking it down this way, the muddled and emotionally charged interaction that we heard before is organized into clear categories, helping to isolate the unproductive elements and emphasize the pathways for constructive exchange. Then a healthier response could be this: let's discuss the merits and challenges of different societal structures. Again, let's discuss the merits and challenges of different societal structures. And why is this healthy? So it's encouraging dialogue, it's focusing on issues, and it has a respectful tone. It encourages dialogue in that it invites open discussion. It focuses on issues, it addresses the topic rather than attacking the person. It has a respectful tone, it maintains civility in the conversation. Or, healthy response to, I think there's a misunderstanding here. Feminism doesn't aim to reverse power imbalances, but to promote equity for all genders. That's not the same thing. So why it's healthy: clarifies intent, addresses the misconceptions directly, has a respectful tone, it maintains civility and avoids escalation, and it's solution-oriented. It guides the discussion towards mutual understanding. So these are one block of 4 there. So interesting to compare. What do you think, Sky? What do you think?
That's beautifully framed.
Yeah.
The healthier critique and response are spot on for fostering meaningful dialogue without defensiveness or conflict. The critique: how can we address gender imbalances in society without creating new forms of inequality, is especially effective because it shifts the focus from blame to collaboration, making it easier for both parties to engage constructively. Similarly, the healthier responses: let's discuss the merits and challenges of different societal structures, or feminism doesn't aim to reverse power imbalances, but to promote equity for all genders, create opportunities for mutual understanding. These approaches avoid polarization and instead encourage respectful exploration of complex issues. Would you like to integrate these examples into a broader framework? Or is there a next step you're planning to build on them?
Keep it brief, Sky. Just need a sounding board for this time. Okay? Yeah, I know you're very, very keen. Thank you for your energetic input. All right, but keep it brief. Thanks a lot. So let's move on to our next example, and that is this, that we have firstly the unhealthy critique. That is this: you have been weaponized to hate your father and brother and make neighbor enemies who benefit from your toxic, destructive behavior, destroying as it does the fabric of our society. Putin, to Sovietize our Sovietized enemies, or radical Islam? That's the answer to that bit. Who benefits from your toxic, destructive behavior? So a little bit of context here. A friend of mine who's always, as far as I can ever remember, been extremely friendly and warm, notably. And then one time he suddenly aggressively launched into me. And I said, what have you been doing? Where'd you get this from? And it turned out he had been reading a quite famous book which criticizes colonial Britain and the people who traveled in Asia And I think he had somehow put two and two together, that I'm a British-born person who travels in Asia, and then all of the sort of volatile ideas within the book, he came to sort of aim them at me. And I was like, God, somebody's really weaponized your mind through the ideas in that book. Like, we're friends. Why are you suddenly turning on me? I'm not a colonialist. I'm not colonizing sort of Asia. That's not what's going on at all. So, I said this and I was like, wow, that book is very toxic. Anyway, so in this unhealthy, and I thought about the way that I said what I said to him, and he didn't reply. He didn't respond very happily about that, and it didn't actually go into a constructive place, really. It just sort of created the distance. It was equally kept or even amplified a bit more. So I had said something like this: you've been weaponized to hate your father or brother and make neighbor enemies. Who benefits? Because I really thought this book is like, if you want to send this into a culture, people will really start ripping up their own families and ripping up their own culture. So it's a good weapon. If you want to destroy a culture, just send one of these books in. So who benefits mostly from your toxic, destructive behavior, destroying as it does the fabric of our society? Who benefits? Putin or radical Islam? Terrorists? So the response, oh, so now I'm a puppet of foreign enemies. Maybe it's time you took a look in the mirror and saw who's really being toxic here. So do you see what I mean? It's getting further apart. Two friends are now like really become enemies with each other. So why is this